Welcome everybody, this is Dennie Heye here for the SLA Europe podcast, and today I'm joined by SLA President Kate Arnold. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Dennie.
So today is the first podcast with you. So last month we had Jill, and today we are over to you. So I also want to ask you a few questions so the members can get to know what it's like to be the SLA President and some of your thoughts. So I think the first thing I want to ask you is, what is the one thing you want to address in SLA in 2014?
Very good question, Dennie. The one thing that I kind of want to address in 2014, and it's not unsurprising given that I'm the first non-North American to be elected as president, is I want SLA to broaden awareness of its international presence and the benefits of being an SLA member. So for my presidential theme this year, am taking on the idea of adopting an attitude of beyond borders. So beyond borders is the theme for our conference this year for Vancouver. Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to do was to get people to start thinking about sort of an attitude or state of mind of beyond borders. So thinking about understanding how many countries SLA has members in. We have members in over 75 countries, and at conference last year we had 200 people who came from outside the US. So in terms of being an association of international status, we really are very much one of those. So I want people to acknowledge that and to understand the benefits of it. Because I think, as we all know, the networking and sharing is what we get most from SLA, and I think that the fact we can offer this on an international stage is fabulous. So I want people to think about SLA as an international organisation. I want us also to raise our international profile. I'm going on a number of visits. Next month I'm going to the Arabian Gulf Chapters Conference, and later in the year I'm going to Australia and New Zealand. And of course, I live in the UK, so I will be going to SLA Europe's events this year. And I just want people to understand and to acknowledge the international nature of the association. And I also want members to understand and appreciate a sort of attitude of mind around beyond borders. So that will mean in their professional life thinking about doing things slightly differently and maybe going out of their comfort zone. Mm-hmm. As an individual, thinking, what can I do that's slightly different? How can I go on beyond the borders of what I'm used to doing? How do I show my value in my organisation? How do I show my value within SLA? So it's very much an attitude of mine, but I am pushing on the international nature of our association.
I like that theme because it's two words, but it has so many meanings. You could build a whole workshop around that.
You could.
The many different borders that you can cross these days. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so.
And can I just add that we are this year celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down. So from the perspective of Europe, that really is a border that has changed very drastically. So I think that's another reason for a good year to have a theme.
And then next time we can talk about some of your visits. Must be interesting. Arabian Gulf, because I hear they're growing very rapidly. So
yes,
that must be quite...
they have grown very, very rapidly. And next month I'm going to their 20th conference. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it will be quite interesting to attend. And it's always interesting to attend another chapter's events, particularly when you go to another country. And culturally, they're very different. And I'm really looking forward to meeting a lot of people and getting a much better handle on how they operate in the Arabian Gulf, and to maybe find out some of their secrets on how they managed to get such a large number of new members in the last year or so. So that's going to be very exciting. And then, as I said, later on in the year, I'm going to Australia and New Zealand, and I will also obviously be going to Canada to go to the Vancouver conference, and I'm also doing a visit to the Oregon chapter. And I've already this year been to Memphis, obviously for Leadership Summit, and met people from the Mid-South chapter there. And then I went to Philadelphia for the American Library Association midwinter conference and had a nice meet and greet with people in the Philadelphia Philadelphia chapter. So
I can just see you having a T-shirt with Kate on Tour 2014.
Yes, I think I probably do need one of those.
Sold out.
Yes.
You mentioned Leadership Summit. So Jill talked about that last month. What is the feedback or the messages that you want to share?
Okay, Leadership Summit this year was a very positive event. It was very upbeat and enthusiastic in terms of an atmosphere, and I was very pleased that we had a very large proportion of members who were first-timers to Leadership Summit, and that's always a very good sign because it shows that there are new faces in unit leadership roles, people who have come to Leadership Summit to learn about how to be a leader and what they need to do in order to run units for SLA. So that was all a very, very positive thing. I think it shows that maybe some of the succession planning has been operating in our association. So that's very, very positive. For me, the presentations covered the nitty-gritty of what people needed to know as a unit leader and what they needed to do. Tara and Kama had done a really good job of setting up very interesting speakers and quite a variety of presentations, and it was really interesting to hear different voices. I was very pleased that SLA Europe was represented by Geraldine and Penny and Sam, and it was very gratifying to see and hear them talk about the success of membership drives and the ECHAs. Having been involved with that for about the last 7 or 8 years, it was very good to see them getting up and explaining and people taking notes on the way in which the ECHAs had been set up. So that was all very good. There was another highlight, which was a presentation from somebody from the Competitive Intelligence Unit, Zena Applebaum, and she provided quite good food for thought on the skills and competencies and role of the profession and some really practical things that people could do in their work life, and she brought to bear an awful lot of the points that are raised in the FT-SLA survey that came out last year. So that was a real highlight, as well as the fact that she actually got everybody to draw pictures of themselves at work, which were quite interesting to see. And if you want to see some representations of that, you should log on to the recap of Leadership Summit webinar that took place a couple of weeks ago, and some of the final slides on that show you some people's pictures of what they look like at work, stick diagrams of people. So that was quite entertaining.
I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, do.
And if you were at Leadership Summit, you're talking about that there was a positive vibe and lots of good presentations. So what are you currently most proud of in SLA?
That's a really interesting question because there are lots of things I'm proud of in SLA. I think if I look back to the last couple of months, I think I'm particularly proud of the way in which the board, which obviously changed over in January with some new members joining, I think the way the board and staff have been interacting and working together on particular pieces of work during Summit and afterwards has been very good. It's been very impressive to see how we've come through with the work from last year's Finance Committee to agree a balanced budget, and are beginning to do some work on looking at our strategy going forward as an organisation, because the strategic agenda, which was set up in 2011, comes to an end at the end of this year, so we've started doing some work on that. So I think the way the board is gelling and working together is very good and is very promising for the future. I think that some of the work that the organisation as a whole has begun to do on thinking about reinventing itself, and I think Jill alluded to some of this in her talk last month with you, I think that is something that augurs well for the future. We had quite an intense year last year and ended up with our name change survey vote, etc. And that was quite a turbulent time, but I think we are clear on we, the board, are clear on what membership want to do in terms of discussions around name change. And we're clear there is nothing happening this year, but we're clear that members want us to do much more in terms of advocating on their behalf. And so we're quite pleased about the work that's taking place now to understand what that advocating will be and what members' needs are. So I think all of those kind of things are are coming into place, so I feel particularly proud about that. I also, looking back on the last 3 or 4 months, I think I'm very proud of the partnership that we've set up with the Financial Times, and I'm very pleased about the way in which the Financial Times survey that they did with SLA about the value of us as a profession has the results that's come up with. And if people haven't read it, I would suggest that they download it from www.ft.com/SLA. It's full of really helpful hints on the 5 key attributes you need to be doing in order to show your value. And it also gives you 12 key tasks that you need to be doing. So if you want to start thinking about what your personal development goals are for the year, there are 12 nice tasks, which very neatly would fit 1 a month into something. So I think that to me, that's been a really key piece of work. And wherever I've gone, regardless of whether it's an SLA event or another information professional event, everybody has leapt on the report and said how well it's been structured, and the results are very appealing. And the fact that it comes from an organisation like the Financial Times means it carries an awful lot of kudos with senior managers. So I think that's been a very positive thing for last year, and I'm hoping that we can build on that going forward this year.
Okay, so while we're speaking about what we can help our members with, what is the one thing where SLA members could help the association with? What can we give back?
Oh, lots of things. I have a nice long list. I think the first and foremost thing, if you're listening to this podcast before the 28th of February, please do make sure that you have completed the membership survey, because that is going to be a great way that SLA can capture information on the needs of its members. And I think that will help us in terms of understanding what SLA needs to provide for its members. So that's one thing. I think members can keep themselves up to date on SLA matters, because if you're an SLA member, it's your association, and you really have an obligation to understand what's going on and why it's happening. So I would advise people to sign up to the Governance listserv, because you'll get information on what's been discussed at board meetings. You'll also get access to other bits and pieces that you need to know about. And the governance list is something that anybody can sign up to. I think you should be asking your leaders, so those people in your units who are responsible as leaders, to make sure they cascade information that they get sent from the leadership list, so that you are aware of what's going on. And I think I'd like to ask members to seriously think on the Beyond Borders theme about what they want from their units, how they think things should be structured, and to seriously take on the idea about reinventing SLA. So if we did start with a blank sheet of paper, how would we structure things? Just begin to think about that, because I think over the next year we're going to be needing to ask members to seriously help us to make sure that we reinvent SLA so that the structures are right for what we will need to have for the next 10, 15 years.
That sounds like a major task, but something I think that's very worthwhile thinking about and addressing.
Yes, and I think we need members to actively start thinking about that. So besides asking people to volunteer and take on roles in their local units, we do need them to start thinking about what would they like to see in the future. And I'm sure if people will come up with a nice long list, and whether we can actually fund and do all of it, I don't know. We're going to have to seriously think about what we prioritise.
Okay, so lots of interesting thoughts, forward-looking, great theme, but I also want to use these podcasts so that the people out there can get to know the person, Kate, a little bit, besides you being president, of course. So is there something like an interesting anecdote or a hobby that you can share with the listeners?
Okay, that's another nice question, Denny, and a good one to end this podcast with. Many people, and particularly those who went to Leadership Summit, because this year the way the board was introduced was a bit of information about who they were and where they worked, and then an interesting fact that potentially members wouldn't know that much about the person, but would be a hook for them to be able to go up to the person and start a conversation. And I said that I do have a big passion for cooking, and I am actually a cordon bleu qualified cook, or chef rather, so I can turn my hand to most cooking exploits. But one of the interesting things was when I got up to make my speech, just after having been introduced, I suddenly realised when I stood up by the microphone and was saying, "Can you hear me?" and people were like, yes, no, kind of thing. I suddenly realised that actually my names, we had Indian names when I used to work in one department in the BBC, and my Indian names were "Heard from afar, Prince's running mouth, and never shuts up." And it seems rather odd now to be able to say those kind of things, because quite often people say they can't hear me when I speak during speeches. So maybe I've tamed myself down, or I'm not speaking into the microphone well enough. But anyway, that's kind of a bit of an anecdote.
Something with a backstory behind it.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Kate, I think we could go on a lot longer, but want to keep this to a limited time because people are probably listening. And we need to keep something for the next time. So for those who are listening, we alternate between Jill, President-elect, and Kate, the President, every month. So next month in March, I'll interview Jill again. And then we have you scheduled again for April. So who knows what we'll be talking about that time. But until then, Kate, I want to thank you very much for spending time with us and sharing your messages. And I look forward to catching up in 2 months.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dennie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.